Hi everybody. In this video we're going to look at the theoretical perspectives and how they're connected to the income stratification unit. So the first of these that we're going to look at is structural functionalism. Again, I'll usually shorthanded as functionalism. And if you remember, functionalism looks at society like a machine or like the inside of your body. All the different parts working together in just the right way in order for your body to function. Or in this case, all the different parts working together for society to function. And applying functionalism to income stratification means that income stratification is one of these parts, right? It's necessary in order for society to function correctly. So a functionalist would say that if we didn't have income stratification, if we didn't have people who made different amounts of money from the very wealthy to the very poor, then society wouldn't work correctly. Now you might agree and you might disagree, but this is just how a functionalist looks at this issue. So key and central to applying functionalism to income stratification is what's called the Davis-Moore thesis. And this thesis says that we pay people and people earn financial rewards proportional to their contribution to society. So that this is the reason why a doctor, for instance, makes much more than a person serving French fries. That a doctor is more valuable to society, their contributions are more important, saving people's lives, operating on people's brains, and whatever else it is that the various doctors do. And because of that, we need to incentivize people to take the time to get that extra education, to learn how to do that stuff, because we need people to do that. So then we need to reward them for doing that. And that a person handing out French fries, although valuable, isn't as valuable as a person who is doing open heart surgery on someone. So that person gets much less of a reward. A functionalist would say that if everybody earned the same income no matter what they did, we wouldn't have enough people to be doing the different jobs that we need them doing. If everybody makes $100,000 a year, regardless of what you do, are there going to be people handing out French fries at McDonald's? Maybe, maybe not. Are there going to be people who go to school for an extra 8 years so that they learn how to do a brain surgery? There might be some who are really interested in doing that, who really like the idea of helping people or doing surgeries and things like that, but are there going to be enough so that our needs for that type of service get met? A functionalist would say no. And again, you might agree, you might disagree. This is just how a functionalist looks at society. So we reward people proportionally to their contributions in society. So one of the main critiques of this is when we look at people like NFL, NBA, and MLB players, right? These people make tens of millions of dollars a year, and is their contribution really that much more important than a doctor or a teacher or anybody else who might contribute in society? Right? So if the doctor makes 200 grand and the sports player makes 20 million in a year, is their contribution really 1,000 times more than saving lives by them playing with the ball in the way that they do? So this is one of the big critiques about functionalism and the Davis-Moore thesis with regards to whether or not this really explains why we see the differences that we do when it comes to income stratification in the different societies, okay? The next theoretical perspective we'll look at is symbolic interactionism. Now remember, this has to do with symbols, the meaning that we attach to things as members in a society, and the interactions that happen between the different members of society and how those interactions are guided by the definitions and understandings that we collectively have. So in the previous video, I was talking a bit about the difference between caste and class systems and saying that class systems have much lower status consistency. That because you're in one given social class doesn't mean that necessarily all of your friends or the person that you're going to marry is also going to be from that social class. That it's possible that you would marry someone from a different social class, or it's possible that you'd have friends from some other social class. The thing about this is while that is possible, it is highly, highly irregular. If you just think about the friends and family members that you have, chances are 90 to 100% of them are of similar social standing as you are. I know that that's the case for me. I don't have friends and family members that are vastly different from me in their social class. Like, I don't know anybody like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or somebody who has that amount of money. I also don't know anybody who's in abject poverty and, you know, can't afford their next meal. Not that I purposefully avoid people like that. You just don't come across them in your day-to-day activities in order to meet and establish relationships with these people. So part of symbolic interactionism as it applies to income stratification is that even though these structural barriers don't exist like they do in a caste system, so in a caste system, there's a structural barrier, right? A social barrier that says that you will not interact with, be friends with, or marry someone outside of your caste. If you do so, you jeopardize your own social standing, right? It's a huge, huge faux pas. You would never, ever do that. And while that doesn't exist in a class system, we still kind of do it to ourselves. Many of our friends and acquaintances and romantic connections come from where we go to school, maybe where we go to work, around where we live. And you went to a school when you were going from kindergarten through high school. You went to a school because you lived in a particular neighborhood, and it was that neighborhood that was connected to that school. Now, anybody in that same neighborhood had to have some amount of money, no more and no less, within a range to live there, right? If they had more money, vastly more money, maybe they would have lived in a slightly more upscale neighborhood than you were in. And if they had less money, maybe they would have lived in a lower version of the neighborhood that you were in. But you were living in the neighborhood that you were living in. So everybody else there also had about that same amount of money. So that's the people that you went to school with. And those are the people that you got to know and made friends with. And then because of that, you're going to decide afterwards to go into college. And when you go into college, you're going to choose a college that also aligns with your financial situation. So you're also going to college for whom the other people there, it also aligns with their economic situation. So again, you are just happening to come across these people, and those become your friend groups, and those become your potential romantic pool, right? So even though we're not necessarily purposefully going out of our way to interact with people in different social standing, we kind of do it to ourselves based on that, based on those economics nonetheless. Okay. Another important aspect of symbolic interaction as it applies to income stratification is this phenomenon, what's called conspicuous consumption. And this is the buying of stuff to show people how much money you have. And this is a behavior that's exhibited particularly by people of lower upper class status, for whom money is something new and something exciting and something fun. So lower upper class people tend to be the ones who most participate in conspicuous consumption, although this kind of behavior you'll see across economic spectrums, maybe with the exception of upper class people. For upper class people, conspicuous consumption is kind of a no-no. But for everybody else, and especially the lower upper class, conspicuous consumption is something that they engage in. And this is something like buying the absolutely fanciest car you can afford, right? Even if it's a little bit too much and it puts a strain on your finances, because it's telling other people, look how successful I am. Look at how cool I am. I can now drive this car. Yeah, it's leased and I only did it for a year, but at least I can look like I'm rich, or look like I have lots of disposable income while I'm driving this thing. Or people who are recently drafted into professional sports. So a lot of times these are people who had middle class beginnings or lower, and then all of a sudden they're making enormous amounts of money. This thing will happen with people who are also newly established musicians, right? Who gain national status. They've had very little amount of money. Now all of a sudden they've got tons of money. And what do you see them doing, right? You see them going to the bar and buying out the bar for everybody. You see them wearing the big, crazy, overly gaudy jewelry, right? All the diamonds and gold everywhere. All the fancy designer clothes, right? Private jets and limousines, right? Because a big function of this is not necessarily that those are the things that are the best for them to have, but it's them communicating to other people, I am rich. Look at me, I am rich. That's what conspicuous consumption is, right? It's about sending a message to other people. It's less about yourself and more about the message that it's projecting. Okay, again, this is especially relevant to people in lower upper class category. Okay, so this is how we've looked so far with symbolic interactionism at the interaction part. Let's look at the symbolic part for a second, because this is also very informative. And when you think about symbolic interactionism, particularly the symbolic part as it connects to income stratification, think about how we define and understand what it means to be poor, what it means to be middle class, what it means to be rich. Like, what kind of person is that? What kind of traits and qualities does a person who is poor have? What kind of traits and qualities does a person who is wealthy have? Right? What kind of person is that? And what does it mean to be poor? What does it mean to be rich? Right? Because these things can be subjective. There are people in the world who would look at you and say that you are rich, whether you think you're rich or not. If that person is coming from a much, much lower income classification as you are, they might look at you and think, wow, you're a rich person, but you might not consider yourself rich. So keeping the thought process of that here in the United States, how do we think about poor people? How do we think about rich people? Okay, and this is a little mental exercise to kind of practice that. Now, not necessarily what you might say, but what would any random person out in society might say as an answer to either one of these two statements? If you were to stand in a public space and you're holding a microphone and your buddy's got the camera on, you're doing one of those shticks where you're interviewing people out in the world, describe a poor person for me, random American. Describe a rich person for me, random American. Chances are you're going to get a whole lot of very positive, very wholesome kind of responses when you ask about a rich person. And chances are you're going to get a lot of negative characteristics when you ask about a poor person. Poor people are lazy, poor people aren't smart, poor people don't try hard enough, poor people this, poor people that, right? Negative kinds of things. A rich person, rich people are smart, and rich people work hard, and rich people, all kinds of positive kinds of things. And the end result of both of these descriptors for these two categories gives the impression that the people who are in their respective categories belong in their respective categories. That the poor person lacks something. And because of the thing that they lack, that is the reason why they are poor. And the rich person has some quality or virtue that other people tend not to have. And it's that quality or virtue that is responsible for the wealth that they have. Now, this runs contradictory to what reality and facts are about these things. Again, as we've talked about before, people who are wealthy usually are wealthy because they won the uterus lottery, right? They just got born wealthy. Happy me, right? My parents are the Walmart family. Yay, I get to be rich. Okay? And that's really the most of it. And likewise, a person who is poor happens to be born to a poor family, right? It's nothing that they did or didn't do. It's not that there's some quality that they have or do not have. It's social conditions that create that situation for them, okay? But based on how our society answers these two questions, these two statements, a poor person is, a rich person is, it's going to have a profound effect on what we think about income stratification and income inequality and whether or not we should do anything about it. Because if rich people are rich because they work harder and they're smarter, well then all a poor person has to do is just work harder and try harder and be smarter. Right? So they don't need any kind of, there's no need to change anything about society. It's these people that need to change, right? They need to work harder. And if they don't do that, that's their choice. So then they can stay poor, right? That's the message that gets communicated, and it ignores all of the data that shows us that it's so not that simple. Right? That there are important and powerful forces in society that will help to determine whether a person is poor or rich and whether they stay that way or not. Okay? Continuing on, looking at the application of social conflict theory. So in a unit like income stratification, it was talking about income inequality. This is really at the core of this whole issue, is social conflict theory. Remember, conflict theory has to do with inequality. So if we're talking about race conflict theory, this is the inequality between people based on their race. If we're talking about gender conflict theory, this is inequality between people based on their sex, gender, and sexual orientation. And if it's social conflict theory, this is inequality between people based on their social class, right? How much money they have. And the founder and father of social conflict theory, as well as one of the most important sociologists to ever have lived, was Karl Marx. And what Karl Marx said is that no matter who you are, you, me, and everybody else, you have one of two relationships to the economy. You are either a worker or you are an owner. Either you work for a business or you own the business. Either you are a person who reaps their financial rewards, the way that you pay for things, because of money that you already have, or you have to work for your money. If you have to work for your money, you are a different class of person than a person who doesn't have to work for their money. They already have a bunch of money and they just get interest and they get to live off that, right? That's the owner class. Marx referred to those people, that owner class, as the bourgeoisie. Okay? This is Jeff Bezos, this is Bill Gates, this is the person who has billions of dollars in their bank and their children. They never ever have to work, right? They can just sit, relax, and then the money will just keep pouring in from interest. Or you're a person who expects paychecks, right? You're trading your labor for a check in return, like I do, and like if you have a job like you do, okay? Those people are called the proletariat, okay? So Karl Marx defined these two different groups of people. You're either the worker or you're the owner. If you're the worker, you're the proletariat. If you're the owner, you're the bourgeoisie, all right? And the workers are far more in population than the bourgeoisie. You might have also heard this expressed as the 1% and the 99%. It's a different kind of vernacular that's being used, but it's communicating the same idea. And that in a capitalist system like we have in the United States, and like we see in many places around the world, capitalism is designed to create inequality and to create gaps in wealth and gaps in power. So that even though that group of bourgeoisie is very, very small, because they are incredibly wealthy, they have enormous power. And then they can use that power to keep themselves in power and to keep the rest of everybody else, the proletariat, the 99%, at a disadvantage. Okay? That capitalism by nature does this. That it by nature subordinates the working people in a society. And what Marx predicted is that this subordination would be so intense that over time, the proletariat, the working people, would ultimately overthrow capitalism and change the economic system and change it to what is socialism, was his prediction. So that we have no private ownership of these businesses, but the people that work for the business are co-owners of the business. So that if you are a person who works at Amazon, you have a fraction of a share or whatever of Amazon Corp, as do all the employees there. There is not one guy sitting at the top collecting all the money, as Bezos does now. Okay? So looking at how these three theories apply is really important to understanding the concept of income stratification. Key to social conflict, again, is this power differential. The employer has all of the authority in how much a worker gets paid, when they're going to work, what they're going to do, whether or not they get to keep their job or not. It's an incredibly imbalanced relationship, okay? And that leaves the employee essentially at the whim of the employer. If the employer wants to pay them X number of dollars, that's just what they have to accept. If the employer doesn't want them working anymore, that's just how it is. Anything that's been different from that you might have experienced have been the product of struggle that's taken place between the working people and those business owners through the labor rights movement, which we'll talk about in class going forward. Okay, so understanding these relationships between functionalism, symbolic interactionism, and social conflict theory, and how they apply to income stratification gives you a broader understanding about how this feature of society works, and hopefully some insight on your own issue for your controversial topic that you're working on. Okay.